Good morning, class. It was German psychoanalyst Erik Erikson who theorized that adolescence was a time of self-discovery, a time for figuring out who you are and who you want to be. Now, being that I was born in 1967, I was not yet an adolescent when the TV show The Partridge Family debuted on ABC television. But by the time I was 12 or 13, that show was in heavy syndication and I really enjoyed it. The Partridge Family were a family band, a touring band, and the show chronicled their balancing of the stardom and the rigors of life on the road with the tedium of family life in the 70s. And the stars of the show were David Cassidy, Susan Dey, and Danny Bonaducci. Now, every guy my age wanted to be David Cassidy because he was super good looking and very hip. And every guy my age wanted to be with Susan Dey because she was gorgeous. But I gravitated towards the character played by Danny Bonaducci because he was a bass player of the band. Now, Danny Bonaducci wasn't a real bass player. He faked it. He just played air guitar, but it was good enough for me. And that helped shape the model of what I wanted to be, or what Swedish psychologist Jean Piaget would call my schemata, the version of what I wanted to be. Then in 1982, along come Duran Duran and their bass player, John Taylor. Now, for kids in the 80s, this was the second British invasion. This was the second coming of the Beatles. And John Taylor was this ridiculously good-looking guy from the UK who could really get down and play the bass. And I was blown away by him. So I had to assimilate him. I had to assimilate John Taylor into my life and adjust my schemata to accommodate him. And so goes growth in adolescence. Now, back in that time, back in the 80s, our influences were, if not totally wholesome, they were somewhat benign. We were typically influenced by one of two things: either a sports figure like Joe Namath or Terry Bradshaw, Richard Petty, or Pele, or a musical act, a band, Duran Duran, Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Cyndi Lauper. Fairly benign influences, but it was not a time without confusion because we had Boy George and Culture Club. Now, is Boy George a girl or is Boy George a boy? We really didn't know. This was the first time we'd been exposed to this type of thing. Now, Boy George, George O'Dowd, is a man, but he was doing this androgynous thing, and he was on the leading edge of that movement. And he was the guy that brought it to the masses, and he did it beautifully. Now, I was not directly influenced by Boy George, but Culture Club had an amazing bass player named Mikey Craig, and I was influenced by Mikey. So again, there goes my adjustment of my schemata, and so goes growth and adolescence. Now, here's the difference between then and now. Back then, let's take Madonna, for example. Madonna, one of the most popular and powerful women of the time. Even Madonna's message was vetted before it got to us. Her songs, like A Virgin, Papa Don't Preach, fairly controversial topics, were vetted before they were released to the masses. Before those songs could ever get to the radio, they had to make it past the producers and past the record company. Now contrast that with today. Anybody with a cell phone can influence millions of people in a matter of minutes. There's no layer of protection between the influencers and the adolescents. And I cannot imagine the fire hose of toxic information that is being sprayed on today's adolescents. And I think that's why there's such calamity in today's youth as they try to navigate their own adolescence. Forget about trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to figure out what they are. We have children today identifying as animals. That's the latest thing. We have children identifying as birds. Now, there are a lot of problems with that. Your veterinarian would tell you that. But here's what I perceive as the biggest problem. Those types of influences have a shelf life. They'll eventually lose flavor and go away. But the ramifications of those influences could potentially last a lifetime and have very damaging effects on these adolescents as they transition into adulthood. So there is my 7-minute rant on a couple of different theories of the task of adolescence and the difference between the adolescence of today and the adolescence of 40 years ago. Thank you.